Hey everybody. I've recently been assigned a international human rights project in my Christian social justice class, and so the goal of the project is to learn about and then discuss in PowerPoint or video format human rights and history of a country that is not the US, because in our class a lot of our focus has been on the United States. And so the country I chose is the landlocked country located in the northwestern part of Africa called Burkina Faso. So without further ado, let's talk about Burkina Faso. As I mentioned earlier, Burkina Faso is a landlocked country, and what this means is that the country is surrounded by land on all sides. It doesn't have any natural coast. The countries that surround Burkina Faso are six, and the countries are Mali, Ghana, Niger, Ivory Coast, Togo, and Benin. Climate-wise, Burkina Faso has grassy savanna type area in the northern part of the country, and in the southern part of the country it is more loosely packed forest. It should be noted that there are areas of Burkina Faso that have been deemed uninhabitable because of the large presence of the tsetse fly, and the tsetse fly causes something called African sleeping sickness, and this dissuades people from settling in those areas. Religiously, Burkina Faso is made up of 61.6% Muslim, while the remaining 40% is a split between Roman Catholic, which has 23.2% of the population, animalistic slash native beliefs, which make up about 7% of the population, and Protestant groups would make up about 6% of the population, and the remaining 1% is other groups or non-religious people. Ethnically, Burkina Faso is made up of 7 different ethnic groups, the largest of which are the Mosi people, who make up over half of the population. The remaining 6 ethnic groups are the Guruni, Fulani, Germa, Bobo, Busani, and Svanufu tribes, which all range from about 8% of the population to 4% of the population per group. And the capital of Burkina Faso is Ouagadougou. So let's get into a bit of the history of Burkina Faso. Before Burkina Faso was Burkina Faso, it was known as the Upper Volta, and like many African countries, it was colonized by a European power. The European power, in the case of Burkina Faso, was France. Now, when Burkina Faso gained its independence from France in 1960, it kept the name of the Upper Volta that was given to them by the French. And there's a lot of remnants you can still see of colonization in Burkina Faso, because French is still the official language of the country, despite it not being widely spoken among the people. The languages that are widely spoken among the people are the Moor and Diuya languages. So after Burkina Faso gained its independence in 1960, from the time of 1960 to 1982, Burkina Faso would undergo 4 different military coups. The last of these military coups would end with Thomas Sankara in power, and Thomas Sankara is possibly the most important person to talk about when talking about Burkina Faso, because Burkina Faso would still be called the Upper Volta if it wasn't for Thomas Sankara, who renamed it as a part of his dictatorship. Thomas Sankara is such an important figure to talk about because a lot of the identity of Burkina Faso and a lot of the current problems with Burkina Faso are a direct result of his death in 1987. So he only ruled for 4 years, yet he's had a profound impact on the nation. One of the more obvious impacts Thomas Sankara had was changing the name of Burkina Faso to Burkina Faso when it used to be previously called the Upper Volta. Burkina Faso means land of the upright men, which basically was Thomas Sankara's way of showing how he wanted to view his people and how he wanted the people to view themselves. He wanted them to view themselves as upright citizens, and he wanted to be a symbol for the world to see that Burkina Faso is a land of people who work hard and try to do things themselves, and they're upright, upstanding people. Outside of the obvious name change, Thomas Sankara also has a long list of other changes and accomplishments he has in relation to Burkina Faso. When he took office, the literacy rate was 13%, and under Sankara's education reforms, the literacy rate grew from 13% to 73% at the time of his death. In addition to revolutionizing education, Thomas Sankara also revolutionized the role of women in Burkina Faso by outlawing polygamy, forced marriages, and female genital mutilation, which would occur in many young girls. And he also appointed many women to high ranking positions in his government because he actively wanted to dispel the myth that women were subservient to men or any type of misogyny that was in that. He actively wanted to dispel that and make sure everybody was on a level playing field and was viewed as equals. He also had certain days where men would do typically women's work as a way to foster a type of understanding between the two genders. One of the most notable things about Thomas Sankar's rise in power was his anti-imperialist stance and his anti-West stance. He didn't want any help from other countries, and he felt that accepting foreign aid from organizations like the World Bank, United Nations, he felt like that was holding a lot of African countries back because he said in his own words, "He who feeds you controls you." And so he took Burkina Faso on the path to food self-sufficiency, which it successfully attained. He took land from feudal lords and redistributed it to peasants, and acts like this helped increase wheat production from 1,700 kilograms per hectare to 3,800 kilograms per hectare at the time of his death. Thomas Sankara was above all for the people, and this can be seen in how he treated his government and government aides. He made his own salary only $450 a month. In his office, he refused air conditioning because he knew that that was a luxury that many of his people could not afford, and so thus he decided that I'm not more than my people, so I refuse air conditioning in my apartment. He also lowered the salaries of civil servants and government workers and made them pay 1 month's salary towards a public service project. And he himself wasn't always traveling around with big swabs of security and fancy cars. In fact, he changed the government's official car from the Mercedes S-Class to the Renault 5, which was the cheapest car in Burkina Faso at the time. It was all a way of him showing to his people that he was a part of them and he was one of them, and he wanted to fight for them, not as above them. He wanted to take down that hierarchy and just lead his people to success. And so, after 4 years of revolutionizing the country, Thomas Sankara's reign and power would come to an end with his assassination at the hands of his second-in-command, Blaise Compaoré, in a France and US-backed coup. The reason for the coup was because Thomas Sankara's policies took away a lot of power from the previously wealthy individuals, and so they put their support behind his second-in-command, and his second-in-command ended up killing Sankara. And with the death of Sankara, this would mark a 27-year rule by Compaoré, which would end in 2015 after he was ousted due to public support after he tried to change the constitution in order so he could rule longer. So after the death of Sankara, many of the human rights issues that we see in Burkina Faso today are a direct result of his death. One of the main issues with human rights in Burkina Faso is the treatment of women in Burkina Faso. So one of the things with the treatment of women is a direct antithesis of what Thomas Sankara opposed, which big issue now is forced marriages, polygamy, and female genital mutilation, which are all things Thomas Sankara outlawed, which are now currently huge issues in Burkina Faso because after he died, those laws were repealed, and now the government is trying to do new efforts in an attempt to outlaw those again, but the reason they're legal in the first place is because of Thomas Sankara's death. While during Sankara's time, women were beginning to be seen as equals to men and were in high governmental positions, now that's not so much the case, and many have seen women viewed as second-class citizens, including women themselves, because there's many stories of women who simply, they don't have access to contraceptives and they have no say in who they marry. Many girls are married off before the ages as young as 12, 14 to 25, 23, older men at their protest, but because their families want that and because the man wants that, they have no say in these matters. And these were things that were coming to an end during the Sankara administration that would eventually, after his death, because there was nobody fighting for those issues that he was fighting for, eventually the rise to those issues came again, and which is now a very big issue in Burkina Faso that people are actively trying to fight against. As mentioned earlier, the person who succeeded Thomas Sankara ruled for 27 years, Compaoré, and after Compaoré was ousted, there was a period of instability in Burkina Faso before the next government could come to power. It was in that instability that eventually the rise of jihad and Islamic extremist groups would eventually take hold of the region. It is believed that Compaoré, during his 27-year reign, was able to strike deals with these Islamic extremist groups and keep them out of Burkina Faso, as while during the 2010s, many extremist groups such as Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda affiliated groups would take over many parts of Africa and terrorize the people. So after his death, during this period of instability, many extremist groups came in and would have infights with each other, and the skirmishes between different extremist groups would end up displacing upwards of 1 million Burkinabe people, and these things create refugee camps, and people are displaced from their homes, and it makes it difficult to live a life when you have to worry about Islamic extremist groups kidnapping people. They've shot people, killed people. There's some groups that are okay with Christians, but other groups that will kill Christians for not being Muslim, and as I stated earlier, 23.6% of the population is Catholic. So these things become a huge issue when there's no real government or military power to stop them. While I've been speaking about Thomas Sankara in very positive light, one of the detractors to his reign in power was that he was but he was kind of anti-journalist and anti-things that came out against him, and he would actively try to jail and hold people on trial for things that he believed were detrimental to his overall vision for Burkina Faso. And now this can be seen in current day times, while before Burkina Faso was seen as one of the vanguards for free press in Africa and was regarded as the 5th best country for free press in Africa. There were recent laws that were attempting to be passed that would restrict journalists from making things that would be considered demoralizing the military, because after Compaoré, the military was very weak, and so the government wanted to try to put a stop to journalists putting things out there that would increase lack of trust in the military and show the military as weak, because, as mentioned earlier, the rise of jihad in the region makes the government feels that it's necessary to show a strong military force so groups like that don't try to take power. Another one of the human rights issues that would come up after Sankara's death is the widespread illiteracy in Burkina Faso right now. While under Thomas Sankara, 73% of the population became literate, currently, in the current state of affairs in Burkina Faso, only 1/4 of the population aged 15 and older is literate, and it is seen as one of the worst cases for schooling. It has one of the worst rates of school enrollment in all of Africa. And while Burkina Faso is still feeling a lot of negative effects from Thomas Sankara's death, they are still imbued with a lot of the spirit that Thomas Sankara's life gave to the people. Just in the 2015 revolution, immediately after, Burkina Faso had what was regarded as one of the more democratic and safe and fair elections in the country's history, that had 60% voter turnout following the election immediately after the fall of the Compaoré regime. And so while things can get a lot better in Burkina Faso, the revolutionary spirit of Thomas Sankara is still with the people, and Burkina Faso is still an example for other African countries on ways they can improve the situation, because what President Compaoré tried to do was create a president for life situation, which is something commonly seen in many other African countries. And Burkina Faso has become kind of an example to say, you don't have to put up with a president for life. The power is in the people, and Burkinabe people realized that they could take power for themselves in order to create a more just and fair system, which can be an example for other African countries moving forward who also suffer from the same issues with democracy. All this talk of revolution is actually what got me interested in Burkina Faso and Thomas Sankara, because in leftist discussions on the internet, I saw his name brought up, and I was looking up the things he's done and his accomplishments, and it showed me that there's a lot of people view Africa as this type of poor state that needs help, and you see commercials for literal starving children in Africa, and we're supposed to go give them our aid and our help. But Thomas Sankara showed a view that maybe we don't need to help them, and maybe our help is actually hurting them, and that these people under the right organization with the right mindset can actually help themselves, and they don't have to be viewed as a charity case. And Thomas Sankara has been a real big inspiration to me and how I view how leftist policies can be implemented into the real world, and my overall view on Africa, because growing up, a lot of my views were influenced by what I saw around me, and all I saw around me was Africa as this poor state, this poor collection of countries and people that needed help and needed to, that big Western civilization needed to help them and aid them, and they couldn't do it without our help. And now Thomas Sankara and Burkina Faso as an example has helped expand my mind on the potential of African countries, because they are very rich in resources. And if the West, in my opinion, after seeing the work of Thomas Sankara, I believe that without Western interference, I think a lot of African countries could thrive. And that's what really made me want to do this project, so I could educate myself more on a country and a president and people that have inspired me a lot in recent times.